I'm Todd Jones, recovering from 30 years as a sports writer. Thanks for joining me as I sit down with some of the best sports writers of our time, who knew the greatest athletes and coaches and experienced firsthand some of the biggest sports moments of the past half century. We'll share stories behind the stories, some we've only told each other. Pull up a seat on Press Box Access. Some folks you have a natural rapport with, right? You're on the same frequency. I've always felt that way about Lenn Robbins. I'm from Kentucky, he's from Brooklyn, New York. Doesn't matter. We just click. Probably because we have the same sense of humor. We're both smartasses. But also because we both saw sports writing as more than writing about sports. We saw the job as a way to educate ourselves about the world, and through that, hopefully better inform readers. I was reminded of that in this conversation with Lenn. You'll hear some great stories from his career and some honest thoughts from Lenn about age and health challenges. He'll make you think and probably make you laugh, too. Welcome to the show, Lenn. Great to have you join us.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm telling you, I was kind of blown away when you called. I thought I owed you money.
Well, you do, actually.
Most guys don't call me.
But you owe me money and I owe you more beer, so it kind of balances out.
Just pick the bar.
Hey, I'm honored to have a guest who covered pro, college, and Olympic sports for damn near 40 years, but also a writer who still holds the detention record at Bildersee Junior High School in Brooklyn, New York.
How the hell did you come up with that one?
Oh, Lenn, I know shit about you that you won't even...
I should leave now.
You can't even imagine what I know about you, Lenn.
Well, I still have a tad of dignity intact. I should go now. Yeah, well, I think that record still stands. Obviously I'm not allowed back in the school, but I think that record still stands.
Well, I'm very, very honored to be talking to somebody who I can relate to with detention records. So here we go. The warden has let us out, and now we got microphones. Well, Lenn, you're Brooklyn born and bred, a city boy, which might explain what happened on a ski lift at the 2002 Winter Olympics. Now, you've covered all kinds of things all over the world. You're on a ski lift. What the hell happened?
Well, look, like you hit it, right? Brooklyn, New York, we didn't exactly have a chalet in Vermont or out in Aspen or anything. I'd never been skiing in my life. So I get on the chairlift because you have to go up to the top of the mountain or whatever, I don't know, to like the press area. And I thought like it would stop at the bottom and like somebody would be there to say like, okay, like, here's where you get off. And no, like the ski lift apparently just continually runs, right? So I missed the drop point and it started going back up and I started panicking because, what a shock, you're on deadline. So I just jumped off. I don't know, maybe like 10 feet or something. And, all of a sudden these alarms start going off and the ski lift shuts down. So, my claim to fame is for about, 5 minutes, I stopped the Winter Olympics.
That's all.
Yeah.
Now you got a story. Well, so what would the New York Post headline have been if you had become the story?
Schmuck falls off ski lift.
There you go.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, you're being too tough on yourself. And I'm being tough on you. So I bring up detention. I bring up falling off ski lifts. It's been a great show, Lenn. I appreciate your time. In all seriousness, no, this is great to have you with us. One of my favorite guys in the business. As we said, New York, born and bred, but you were all over the world, all over the country, covering different things, and so we ran around somewhat. And I just want to, when you think back on the years, all those years of covering sports, does anything just come to mind right away when you think about your career?
I guess two things. One of them is, what a great way to kind of like see the world for free and like meet all these walks of life, all these people. Mm-hmm. We went to the Great Wall of China, and there are like 3 ways to get down the 3 walls of China. You can walk back down. You can take like the quote unquote ski lift back down.
Right.
Or you could take these little bobsleds, actually, these like single bobsleds.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, and you control the speed, right?
Allegedly.
Now, this is communist China, right? So they have not policemen, they have soldiers like every 20 yards rifles up, full military, like no smiles, right?
Yeah, they like the word control over there. So.
Oh, yeah. And I'm like, how fast can this bad boy go? Even though there are signs saying, do not exceed. And next thing you know, I'm like right up against the guy in front of me. I'm basically like tailgating him. We get to the bottom and I get off. There are like 6 soldiers waiting for me, right?
Really?
Yeah. And, only one guy who I guess was the head spoke both Chinese and English. And fortunately, I'm with the Brooklyn Nets, so we all had our Brooklyn Nets attire on. But that was almost my international incident, right?
See, once again, detention record.
I had to have the head of our party speak to the head of, not like Chairman Mao or anything, like the head of their party, right? But
so what is the Chinese word for schmuck?
I don't know. All I know is, man, the bayonets on the tip of those rifles were.
I'd like to hear your call to the office after that one. And
I can remember covering the Olympics in Athens, which was just the birthplace of it, right?
Right.
And so they had the shot put, again, an event I had never covered. I knew nothing about it, right?
Right.
But this is where it took place, right? This is literally the birthplace of a sport that people don't pay attention to except for every 4 years, right?
Yeah, this is the 2004 Olympics in Athens, Greece, and you're in Olympia, where they actually had the ancient Olympics.
Yeah, and they still have the arena intact, right? And you see these 310-pound guys, just massive, right? Mm-hmm. And women also, right? You can't even imagine what their strength training might be. And they're walking out and there are tears rolling down their cheeks. Mm. They're just so humbled, right? Because, people see the shot put and they just think, they're, right? There's so much, that goes into it mentally and form and all that other stuff.
Right.
And I, you just knew at that moment that you were seeing something truly humbling, right? Mm-hmm. And, why would that stick with me? I'm a football, baseball, basketball, hockey guy, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because you could, you hear the wind rustling through the trees and it was the same thousands of years ago.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, let's set the scene. It's the very same patch of dirt with the stone arch that the athletes would walk under.
Yeah.
And there's these grassy slopes, and there's 18,000 people there watching, and which isn't a huge crowd, but again, it's shot put. And again, you're at the ancient site. I can remember the sound of the locusts. And the reason that sound sticks with me is that I read, accounts of the ancient games where people talked about the sound in Olympia of the locusts. And so you immediately thought, this is exactly what it sounded like centuries ago.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Great. Yeah, great.
Amazing.
If it stayed with me this long, I'm taking that one to the grave.
Yep, definitely. Yeah. I hear you on that. So you're thinking about places like that. You're going to China. You're in Athens, but it all started, before you got to the New York Post, where you were 16 years, longtime writer there, and also 2 stints at the Record in New Jersey. It all started before then at an NFL game where you first got some publicity. You were at the Greenwich Time in Connecticut. And it was December 10th, 1983. The New York Jets were playing their final game at Shea Stadium. Now, that just sounds like a disaster, right? The Jets in Shea Stadium. You were there, and your coverage got some recognition, kind of set you up, right? So what the hell was that day like?
I had actually been working at that time at the Greenwich Time, and I was covering high school sports, taking high school football scores over the phone and, trying to make sure I didn't misspell somebody's name because, in Greenwich, Connecticut, who knows who was going to call you, could be the CEO of Disney or something and, say you misspelled Muffy Heffinger's the third's name incorrectly, right?
I got a problem with that polo coverage.
Right. And I kept begging to do some pro sports, begging. And I don't remember exactly how it came to be, but they called me the day before and said, I got nobody to do the Jets, do the Jets tomorrow.
Right.
I kid you not. I was there so early. I was the first person in the press box.
Were you wearing a suit?
I was wearing a suit. I didn't know where the press gate was, so I'm walking around the stadium like 4 times. So I get up there, I'm sweating like a pig, right?
Are you nervous?
Oh, I was beyond nervous, right? I'm trying to make sure, like, does my phone line work? All that stuff, right?
Right. This is your chance, right?
Yeah. The Jets get their rear ends kicked by the Steelers. People are setting fires in the stadium. They're ripping chairs out. My youngest sister was at the game, and I remember saying, like, do I cover this story or do I, like, go try and find my youngest sister? And of course, my priorities all out of whack. I stay and cover the thing, right?
Right.
And I'll never forget, if I remember correctly, Terry Bradshaw had come back for that game. He'd been out for a while with an elbow injury.
Yeah, he was out for like 11 months, and he started the game and then got re-injured early in the second quarter. Yeah.
So what happened was, you run down after, right, to the locker rooms, and it wasn't as sophisticated or controlling as it is now, where you've got, PR guys and security guys and ropes and this and that. And so somehow I managed to get right to the door of the Steelers locker room. Mm-hmm. And the door opens up and Bradshaw walks out and he just stands right next to me and now crushed, right? So I'm literally crushed up against Terry Bradshaw, right?
Right.
And he sees me and he goes, "How we doing today?" And I said, "How am I doing? Like, how are you doing?" Right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. He got hurt again that game, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was great. Look, I don't know what we do, right? I don't know if it's an art or a science or whatever. I just remember when I got back up to the press box, like, I didn't even have to think. I just started typing, I must have sat in my seat literally for like 35 minutes, didn't take a sip of water, nothing, just typed.
Right.
Yeah, and I remember feeling like when it was all done, like I felt like I was back in high school after I'd completed like an athletic event, and you're just like, everything you got is out, right?
Exhausted,
Yeah. And it was just one of those days where you say to yourself, like, how lucky am I, right? How lucky am I? A guy, from a neighborhood, right, in Brooklyn, like, hundreds of thousands of other guys. I'm standing next to Terry Bradshaw.
Right. You're some kid. Yeah. Yeah. And you're doing what you always wanted to do. You're covering a game, an NFL game.
Yeah.
Well, Lenny, you said you were lucky, and you were in a sense, but you really took that opportunity and turned it into a great career. You went on to the Record in New Jersey and then on to the New York Post for 16 years, back to the Record. You've covered so many different things, but I got to know you from covering college sports because you were the national college writer for many, many years based in New York, going around the country. You're even El Presidente of the Football Writers Association of America. When I think of college football, so much attention is on the Southeastern Conference in the South. So here's a guy from New York, Mr. Brooklyn, heading down into the South. There had to be some really interesting encounters for you as a New York guy going down into the South all those years.
Well, first of all, that presidency, that was a rigged election. Let's be honest about things, right?
I voted for you twice.
There you go. You are my constituent. Yeah, I remember covering it was Florida at Georgia. And you hit it right on the head. The Northeast is very different than most of the country. College football is not a big thing. Most of the college football fans here are people who moved here or went to school, Michigan or Georgia or whatever. And, now they're making New York their home.
Right, or they're gamblers.
And, the gamblers, right? My people. Florida won at Georgia. And, one of the things you start to really try and do is, can I get something different, right? Can I get a different voice in my story, right? Mm-hmm. Can I get a different take?
Right.
And I see Vince Dooley in the back of the interview room, right? And I'm like, oh, this could be interesting, right? Like legendary coach,
Georgia coach, a long time.
Hall of Famer, national champion, right? I mean,
Right.
So I go back there and, I introduce myself and, people from New York don't think or know they have an accent. Other people have to tell them that they have an accent, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, Mr. Dooley, you got to be impressed, with what Florida did today. And man, he gave me one of those hairy eyeballs, right, that I will never forget. And I thought he was mumbling, but that's who Vince was, right? It was a fine football game, right? And
like he had marbles in his mouth.
Right, like you can continue to open your mouth and prove that you're an idiot, or you can walk away. I, of course, choose the former, right? And I said, well, looked like they kind of like out-toughed you guys today. Right. And literally it was kind of like the audio broke for about like 15 seconds. He didn't say anything, just continued to stare at me. And like, I'm thinking now my fly's open or something, I don't know. And he just kind of like repeated, I thought both teams competed well, right? Something like that.
Right, right.
And then he literally just turned around and walked away.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Like I had body odor or something like that.
He had enough of that Yankee.
Yeah. And it wasn't until like years later, I was kind of recounting the story a little with Mark Schleybaugh, great writer, at ESPN.
Right.
And like, he just kind of like looked at me like his head dropped a little, and he was like, I applaud you for trying to get but trying to get Vince Dooley to talk after a Georgia loss to Florida, right? And back then, of course, the game was played in neutral site, right? That was it, right? Now that I think about it, yeah.
Jacksonville, right? World's greatest cocktail party, yeah.
Yeah, you drive in there. I didn't know this. Like, if you have a Florida bumper sticker on, right? Georgia fans throw like stuffed animal alligators under your tires. Right.
Nice.
And conversely, like, if you've got a Georgia, decal or whatever, Florida fans are throwing a little bulldog under you, right? I mean, it starts, from that drive down.
Yeah, I remember covering the Red River Shootout in Dallas at the old Cotton Bowl, Oklahoma versus Texas. It's literally right in the middle of the Texas State Fair while the fair is going on. And I always remember this guy with a big sign walking around with these handwritten numbers on it. And it was like telling the time, and every minute he would flip over one of the minute numbers and it said whatever time it was, and Oklahoma still sucks.
I remember, because that's held at the Texas State Fair, right?
Right.
And again, like, the only horse I ever knew was Mr. Ed, that old television show, right? I never had any interaction with a horse, right?
Right.
And I remember walking out to like the pens, and there were these like enormous, cows, and, I don't even know what to call them, but the gal I was with at the time actually grew up in a farm in South Jersey. And I called her up and I'm like, you got to see these cows. And she's like, well, describe it, right? And she does, and she tells me like what kind of cow that is, right? And then I went to like one of the like quote unquote snack bars, and I had a fried salad for the first time in my life. Fried salad.
Fried salad. I got to get one of those.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, welcome to Texas, right?
That's awesome. I love it.
And that's a great game. For all these rivalries that, have switched it so it's home and home, that Red River Shootout where, literally at the 50-yard line, right?
Right.
There's a guy from Oklahoma sitting right next to a guy from Texas.
Right down the middle. Yep.
And, that's magic, right?
Yeah.
And
one tunnel, remember? One tunnel at the old Cotton Bowl.
One tunnel.
So they would have to go out together, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I knew exactly when I get the college football bug. I was young. I was like 9 years old or something. And I had a little black and white TV in my room, right?
Right.
And it was a Saturday morning, and I'm watching Michigan Northwestern. And I don't know anything really about the two schools. I thought the Michigan helmets were cool. I didn't know that, Northeastern's claim to fame at that point was that's all right, that's okay, you'll be working for us someday, right? Michigan scores a touchdown, kick off, force a fumble, recover the fumble, score a touchdown in the next play. The place is going wild, right? It's the big house. And I was just like, the energy that like, you literally felt like it came out of the TV. I'm like, one day I got to go to some of these places. I got to be there.
Well, you did for many years, right? And you got to live that out as a writer. So what was it about college football? What did you learn about college football as you covered it all those years, and what did you enjoy about it? Maybe there's certain games or moments that really enhanced that.
Well, certainly the push Bush game.
Notre Dame, USC, right?
Notre Dame, USC. I know people roll their eyes sometime, like when Notre Dame special. It's special. You go out there, you walk the campus, the grotto. Touchdown Jesus. And you're walking through the parking lot, and there could be somebody from like the class of '57 tailgating right next to like some kids who may be just graduated like 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that's what college football does. College football brings people together, brings communities together. You wind up hearing incredible stories of, two people who met at a college football game, and 30 years later, one turns out to be the kidney donor for another, right?
Right.
And it gave me an appreciation for, in a way, what's missing in the Northeast. Why don't we have this in the Northeast? And
that's interesting.
Yeah, and and that's the thing. You asked me before, what did I learn? I learned about quote unquote small town America. I learned about the importance a college football program and these people have in their communities, right? But, then I remember covering that 86 championship game, Miami, right? Penn State, out in Arizona. At that time, the Record was such a small newspaper that I was in the auxiliary press box, which is a euphemism for you're up in the top deck.
All right, hold on a second. You said at that game, the paper,
Yeah, at that time, okay. The Record was small, right? So I was in the auxiliary press box, which is a euphemism for you're in the top deck, basically like hanging out in the crowd, but there's like a little workstation for you, right? Remember, I had like a little lamp, right? Yeah. And I had an outlet. And of course,
Radio Shack Tandy, right?
Yeah, I think that's what I was working on. Yeah,
you see like 4 lines of copy,
right?
You'd end up with these paragraphs that were like 80 lines long because you didn't realize it.
And you always lived in fear, right? That you were going to hit a key and everything you had just done was going to like evaporate.
Oh yeah.
Right, and we've all had that, right? You heard someone scream in a press box, right? Drop an F-bomb, kick a chair, and you're like, you got Radio Shack.
Yeah, it was like a battlefield. Somebody hit a mine, tripped a mine. Oh, yeah. That poor bastard.
Fire in the hole. So again, like New York, I didn't know that, I'm thinking Arizona, right? Hot, desert, whatever. You know how cold it gets at night at like, 2:00 in the morning in the desert?
Yeah.
I couldn't feel my fingers typing by the end of the story. And, then, of course, they come with, like, the leaf blowers and stuff. That's a blast, right?
Oh, yeah, right.
Next thing you know, you got some guy who, God bless him, he's making $4.50 an hour at that time, right? Right. Dust is coming up in your face,
You're bringing back good memories, Len.
Oh, it was great.
So you're covering a game like that. I mean, you did it, too, in college basketball, right? I mean, you covered so many Final Fours, and when the game's on the line and deadline's rushing at you for your New York edition, you're sitting there like at 86 at the Indiana-Syracuse game, right?
Yeah. Wow. What a memory. Two things about that. I remember thinking, man, if I could ever get to like a Final Four, right? To me, those are like the best 3 weeks in sports.
Why? Why do you think that?
Because of kind of like what I said before about what colleges mean in a community, right? Any community. And, to have a Davidson, playing a Wisconsin, right? Doesn't seem to add up. And, it's interesting. I just brought that up off the top of my head. Bob McKillop is a New York guy, right? His father was a New York City firefighter, right? I got really close to Bob. And they played Wisconsin one year. They were up something like 7 with, like less than a minute to go. And, why was Davidson, competitive, beyond competitive, right? Like an NCAA tournament team from, that small conference, because they didn't beat themselves, right? They were so fundamentally sound, and they committed like 3 turnovers and missed a free throw or 2 in like that final minute, and they lost. And instead of going to the interview area, I made a beeline right for the Davidson locker room.
Great choice. Why did you make that choice in that moment?
One of the things you're taught is know your readership, right? Know who you're writing for, right? Mm-hmm. New York Post, Bob McKillop, Long Island guy, dad's a firefighter. It's a national game, yes, but I'm writing from a New York perspective. So, most of the country's probably writing great Wisconsin win and they deserve it, right? I'm writing, New York guy goes down, right? In like the most painful way, right? And so McKillop, right? I think he had a kid on that team whose dad also was a firefighter, right? And I connected with those guys. In fact, I'd written like a story leading up to that game because at Davidson, you get your laundry done. It's part of your tuition. You get your laundry done, right? And I wrote like, why in the world would anybody not want to go to Davidson, right? Beautiful. The president of the school like tracks me down in the press room like the next day. And I don't know about you, but like, whenever I hear somebody's looking for me, I'm like, oh boy,
Yeah. Somebody wants my ass, right?
Yeah,
I'm gonna be catching some fire here.
Right. Control yourself, hear them out,
Right.
Because, you're not as smart as you think you are, right? So they may have something that actually is worth hearing.
Right. You can learn something, right.
Yeah. So I get to the locker room just as the door opens. McKillop walks out, and I'm the first person he sees, and he says, "Jesus, Lenny." Like the basketball soul had been drained out of him, and he's a competitor, so that loss hurt for him. So McKillop in that moment, after he said, "Jesus, Lenny," he said, I just stared into the faces of like 15 kids who's like think their lives were shattered right here, right now. And it's painful, it's awful. I have to help them get through this moment. I have to, right? But somehow, some way, a belief that they'll be better. They'll be better people. They'll be more resilient. They'll deal with heartbreak or whatever better because of this moment. And, look, you have 18, 19, 20-year-old young men and women, unfortunately, who get killed in battle, right? So I don't want to make this out to be, in a way more than it is.
Keep it in perspective,
if you're a college athlete and you lose in the NCAA tournament in a game you thought you had won, you're the underdog, right? How many times have you read David versus Goliath in April, right? March and April, right?
Right.
For them, that is the most important thing. So I'm always looking for coaches who I honestly believe are thinking of their kids first.
I remember a coach, the late, great Skip Prosser, the Wake Forest head coach.
You just hit the nail on the head.
He was an assistant at Xavier University when I was covering Xavier basketball in the early 90s, and they had an NCAA tournament game where they played number 1 Indiana in the second round in the Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis. So you're talking about like all the, everything set up for, Custer's last stand. Well, lo and behold, Xavier had a really good team, and they take Indiana down to the wire. They had the lead with a minute to go, and they had a turnover, and they ended up losing by a couple. And early in the second half, the foul count was 8-0.
Let me guess.
In favor of Indiana.
Yeah.
And I remember, Pete Gillum was the head coach, another Brooklyn guy, and his trainer, Jay Ross, was screaming at the Brooklyn referee that they knew. And anyway, I go into the locker room after the game, and it was, like you said about Davidson, it was beyond just we lost a basketball game. It was so crushed, about the opportunity. And I remember Skip pulled me aside, and he didn't ask about the officiating, but he said to me, "Why are their kids better than our kids?" And I always thought about that. That's how he viewed it.
Yeah.
That Indiana was getting protected because they had some reasons to be protected because it might help things. Now, I'm not saying the game was fixed or anything like that. It wasn't. Indiana, all credit to them, came back and won the game. They were the number 1 team in the nation. But that's how the assistant coach viewed it for his players. And that told me a lot about Skip in that moment, that he was thinking about his players and how it impacted them. And so that just stuck with me, through the years.
Look, these coaches, they'll coach another game. some schools, they may never get to another Final Four, but they'll coach again, right?
Right.
Your seniors, they're going home.
Well, you got to experience these type of people by covering, games throughout the nation, college football and basketball. And I think that's, bringing a perspective into different environments. Like we said, going down south, going to all these small towns, big city environments. It really teaches you about people. And I don't know about you, but I felt like it taught me how to write about them because I was experiencing so many different types of folks. And did you ever feel that impact too, that you felt like almost personally you grew from the people you encountered?
Oh, that's one of the things I've been trying to convey, right? We all grow up with perceptions, right? Right, wrong, whatever, because of, what was the environment that you grew up in, right? What were your teachers like? What were your parents like, right? What were your neighbors like, right?
Right.
And, you hope you're surrounded by good people, but until you get out there yourself and go down and, gosh, I remember once the drive from Jacksonville to Gainesville, I think it was. I flew into Jacksonville and I drove to Gainesville, cover a Florida game. And you go through some towns, Starkey, where I think the state prison is, that just looked, I called it poor and like country poor, right?
Wow.
And I wound up stopping at, I don't know, some like all-night like diner or whatever. Two guys come in, overalls, hats, right? Big dudes, right? Sit down at the counter. Next thing I know, I'm like deep into a conversation with them, right? About like how the price of gas like literally affects their ability to buy like a carton of milk, and hearing them talk about, how do I turn to my kid and say like, that's all we got for dinner tonight, right? And heck, the neighborhood that I grew up in, I'm not going to say it was poor, but you had some families that were scraping to get by, right? So what do you learn, right? And it, I guess it's poignant at this day and age when we're at each other's throats, right? What do you want? You want a better life for your kids and your grandkids. You want safety. You want health. You want happiness, right?
Right. And I think that's why the New York Post and your years at the Record, they sent you places, to write about. It's almost like you're bringing New York some education by writing about these different environments and these different players and coaches.
I remember going to, I think it was UCLA or USC at Oregon, and the Post sent me up there, right? Holy cow. And Phil Knight is in the back of like for some reason, it was almost like a press tent. And so I'm thinking just like I thought about, when you try and get a different angle, right? Vince Dooley. I walk to the back and I'm like, hey, Mr. Knight, Lenn Robbins, New York Post. He goes, the New York Post is out here covering Oregon football. Now I've made it. I'm like, now I've made it. You run Nike, dude. Right? Because you don't think to yourself, at least I never did, oh, hey, I work for the New York Post. We're all doing the same job wherever we're doing it, right? Because it's about people, right? It's about the athletes you're covering, the stories that are unfolding, right? I can still remember the first event I ever covered, girls field hockey, Greenwich versus Stanford. Yeah, which is kind of like a civil war, if you will, of girls high school field hockey. I never saw the sport before, right? I see all these girls with these like canes, right? In my high school, they're not giving girls sticks and letting them walk around the halls. Trust me.
Right.
And some ref blowing the whistle. It seemed like every 30 seconds and doing this kind of a motion, right? Obstruction. I don't know about you. I don't keep stuff on my walls, right? Like this award or whatever, right? The only thing I keep is the Greenwich field hockey gave me a varsity letter after covering their team, right? They won the state championship, as it turned out. Wow. A little bit of lightning in a bottle, right? Right place, right time, stars align. Learned so much from that field hockey coach, B. Walco. I'll never forget her, right? she always used to say, just do it with dignity, as if like that should be obvious. That should be always the bottom line, right? And there were times I knew I screwed up, and I didn't do it that way, You want to go back and say to those people, I owe you one, All
right, what? Give me a time. Give us a time when you screwed one up.
When did I not screw that up? Gosh.
Because we all have.
Okay.
We all have things that we look back on as a reporter and a writer and say, man, I wish I had that one back.
Yeah, okay. This one's kind of easy in a way. Ralph Willard, great basketball coach, was at the University of Pittsburgh, for a while.
Western Kentucky.
Yeah. And a really good man, right?
Right.
Yeah, really good man. In fact, he coached Western Kentucky to an upset over Seton Hall, ironically, right? Kevin Willard then goes on to coach Seton Hall, right? Mm-hmm. He had been struggling a little, probably a lot. And a guy called me and said, Pittsburgh's firing him, right? And in my screwed up zeal to get the scoop, right? Because Post was one of those places where you got to break news. You got to get in the middle of it, be in the middle of it, right? Mm-hmm. I tried calling one guy in Pittsburgh to get confirmation. I called one of my buddies, Jerry Dulac, great reporter in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, Jerry, great guy, yeah.
Yeah. I didn't get him. And I wrote the story without a double confirmation, right? And of course, the next day Pittsburgh's playing and coach has to answer all these questions. And he didn't really know me from home. We knew of each other. I'm sure I probably covered one of his games. And he said, look, guys, Lenny Robbins is, a stand-up guy, and a good reporter. But, if this is true, I haven't heard anything of it, right? And he wasn't getting fired, And the guy who called me, right, wanted the Pittsburgh job. He was an assistant in the Big East, right? And
he was planting something for his own benefit, yeah.
Right, and in that moment in time, and I could make 20 different excuses, I screwed up. I didn't do the simple thing of getting a second confirmation or holding the story until I got a hold of the, I know maybe you can hear just it still kind of guts me to the day, really does. Because you should always remember that you're one of these jobs where you impact people, right? You impact them, right? I tell this to my kids, I'm fortunate enough to teach at a couple of places now, right?
Right.
Rutgers, Montclair State, Brooklyn College, love them all. If you're a plumber, right? And, my cousin's a plumber. I think it's a great profession, right? If you screw up the job at somebody's house, who's going to know about it, right? The homeowner, a couple of neighbors, maybe immediate family, right? Mm-hmm. If you write something about it, particularly about a kid, right? And I call them kids. They'll always, I did then, I will now, right? You could really impact somebody's life. So always take that second to kind of sit back at the laptop or whatever, right? Just take a breath, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of that, there's so much emotion involved in sports, and in the world today, we're just throwing it out there, right? Fire this guy, fire that guy, and it's really dehumanizing. And, I was as guilty of it as anybody when I was covering sports, but I always tried to catch myself and remind myself that, like you said, you're impacting people. And it goes beyond what you see on the field, on the court, on your television screen.
Yeah. And trust me, there are more people out there who think that, I'm not a sensitive person, and I don't know if I am or I'm not, but you got to listen to that other voice. You have to.
Right. Well, you can learn in so many different situations. And again, you covered college sports for many, many years as a national writer. But, Len, you've also covered other things. You worked for the National, Frank DeFord's baby back in the day at 90 and 91. And you covered NFL, you covered NBA. You also have done some hockey for the Post. You did some, or actually for the Record, I believe, for the New York Rangers. Were you at the 90, by the way, were you at the 94 Stanley Cup Championship Game 7 Rangers? What did you enjoy about covering hockey?
Wow, getting me in trouble. Okay. I love covering hockey. I remember covering a game in Ottawa. There's a canal that goes right through Ottawa, and obviously it's frozen through, most of the hockey season. And I check in at the hotel, and I want to go to the skate, and I'm kind of running late. And I said, can you tell me the best way to get to? And she says, what size skate do you wear? And I'm like, it's the oddest, response I've ever gotten when trying to check in, right?
That's like fried salad.
Your credit card's been declined.
It's like fried salad.
Right, yeah. I didn't think about that. Yeah, had your credit cards been declined and had do you have another form of ID? Right, I've got that, right? Well, it turns out everybody in Ottawa skates, and they skate down the canal to get to places, right? Just like I jump in a cab. Right?
Wow.
I was like, I don't skate, and the woman then looked at me probably like Vince Dooley did, right? But anyway, I remember covering my first game in Montreal.
Wait, hold on a second. Wait a minute. Did you skate? Did you put the skates on?
I couldn't skate. You kidding me, man? There would have been like a splotch of blood, from the hotel to the arena.
Once again, another embarrassing call to the office.
Yeah, grab the cab. Turned out it was only a couple of blocks away. I could have walked, right? But I think like the front counter person was just so astounded by this creature that had wandered in, right? She didn't even think, it's only like half a mile, So yeah, I remember covering this game the first time the Rangers were playing at the Canadiens when I was covering them.
Right.
And, to me, that's it. That's the cathedral of hockey, Montreal, right? Guy Lafleur, right? All that stuff going through my head. And the guys on the beat were telling me that there was a gentleman's club that I had to go to, right?
Here we go.
And yes, I've been to a few gentlemen's clubs, right? And, most of them have not been Ford models. Let's leave it at that, okay? All right? You walk into Shea Stadium, and it's a European men's club. I mean, very attractive women, first-class service.
I would never know. Thanks for informing me.
I know. That's why I'm here. I'm here to educate. Remember I said, I owe you money at the beginning of the show?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. And Messier and Ulf Samuelsson are sitting at, the table, right? It's raised up a little. Two beautiful women, sitting with them. Messier has 2 stacks of cash in front of him.
2 stacks?
One American dollars, one Canadian dollars. Yeah, 2 stacks.
He's got both currencies.
And trust me, he's got them both. I mean, bricks. I've never seen something like that, right? Well, Ulf Samuelsson, married 2 kids, and, he's not really doing anything wrong. Just, they're having a beverage and they're looking at the gals, right? Well, he sees the reporters coming and he jumps up in a panic, starts to jump up. And Mess just puts his hand so subtly on Ulf's forearm and looks at us and nods. We nod. Ulf sits back down. We go to a table. Few minutes later, if that long, waitress comes over with a bottle of champagne and, ice glasses. And, we're sports writers. We don't drink champagne. We're like, what's the house special beer?
Can't even spell it.
Right. Probably can't. And she just said, compliments to the gentleman at that table, Messier. And no, that's not why I think he's the greatest leader of all time.
I was just going to say, is that why?
Didn't hurt.
Is that why he's the ultimate leader, captain?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, who guarantees a win, right? Joe Namath did. Mark Messier did. Yeah, they're down 3-2. They got to win in New Jersey. Then they got to come back and win at the Garden. Smooth as silk, I guarantee we're going to win.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he goes out and scores the winning. Just, there are some people who were put on earth who have the magic, the skill, the guts, right, to the moment's brightest, right? They talk about that, right? Mm-hmm. They grab it, right?
Right. Magic. And they know when to send champagne.
Yeah, magic. Yeah.
But there was another thing in 1994 I wanted to ask you about before we leave, and that's the New York City Marathon that year. You were awarded an Associated Press Sports Editor's honor for your coverage of that event.
I'm kind of like at the front of the entrance, if you will, of where the runners come into Central Park. And there were just, a couple of cops, no barricades, no nothing, like really. And this guy comes in, and one of the cops kind of like, and points, sends the guy the wrong way.
Yeah, into Central Park.
Yeah, sends him the wrong way. Like, I don't know, they were like, was it 26.2? There's 0.2 left or whatever, right?
I think he had a little money on the result.
He was ahead of his time. He knew that betting was going to be the thing, right? He knew it, right?
I got the other guy plus 300 yards.
Oh, that's great. And, I don't remember how far he ran. It wasn't that far, but it was far enough that the other guy took the lead. And then like two other cops and a race official, fairly quickly. But like I said, the other guy took the lead.
Yeah, Benjamin Paredes. Yeah, another Mexican runner, took the lead.
And this guy just put on this kick, I guess it was called, right?
Yeah, and this is only a half mile from the finish line.
Something like that, yeah.
Puts on a kick, as you say,
and
as runners say.
Comes back and he wins it, right? And I'm just thinking to myself, you've been asking me a lot about what it's like to go around the country, right? And one of the best thing to me about being a New Yorker is when I'm walking through the streets, right? And I see somebody's like, they're looking at their map and, they barely speak English,
Mm-hmm.
I get such a Jones out of going up to them and saying like, can I help you? Right? Where are you trying to go, right? Sometimes there's a total language barrier. They're pointing at a map. I'm pointing where they are.
Right.
I just absolutely love that, right? And so it just came to me like, this is one city you don't want to get lost in. Even though it's really kind of simple, right? First Avenue, Second Avenue, Third Avenue, right? If you've never been here before, it can be dicey. I remember Nebraska played in the Kickoff Classic, which was played before the season started. It was one of those kickoff games.
Yeah, across the river and into Meadowlands. Yeah.
Yeah. Tom Osborne, Regal guy, brings his team in. And I was in Times Square when the Nebraska buses rolled in, right? They flew into Kennedy or whatever. And these guys, most of them at that point were Nebraska kids. Nebraska was like Nebraska linemen, California, like skill, right?
Right.
Occasionally, like a guy from Jersey would go out there, Rozier, right? Mike Rozier. And these guys were looking up like they had landed on Mars, right? The billboards, the lights, the skyscrapers, right?
Right.
Sometimes I look at the skyline and I'm like, there are like 3-4 like freaking skylines here, right?
Yeah, depending on the time of day and your perspective, yeah.
And so that like you get reminded again, you know what? Most people don't grow up like this, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's right here, like, New Yorkers are rude. Some of them are. We're going to be pretty rude a-holes, right? But, it's a different pace, Hate to like that it has to come to something like this, but 9/11 showed people like, we all want the same things,
Right.
Just like I said before, you want the best things, for the next generations of you.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So did you bring that idea of being lost to the story that you covered?
I think that was kind of like my lead. Like, this is the one city you don't want to get lost in, right? 5 boroughs and, just kind of like then tried to like let it describe itself, like what happened. And, I don't remember the story, line by line, of course, but I remember, you speaking of Silva, you speaking of the guy who came in second, and like their quotes were kind of like perfect. They were like, yes, like, I was a little confused, right? Like, you just ran 26 miles and now you're confused? Again, it was just one of those like, you probably heard this a million times, right? As a writer, right? Stay out of your own way, right? Don't sit there and think for a second that you're going to sit there and create like, some epic, writing that's going to be studied for like decades to come. Just write the goddamn story.
Yeah.
Right?
Tell me a story. What was it like?
Yeah.
Like you're sitting in a bar. What the hell happened?
Exactly.
What was it like? Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I keep with me. Like, when I'm writing, or if I'm lucky enough to get called to do a TV spot, I'm sitting at a bar, I'm sitting around a table, I'm sitting around the living room table, pizza box, a couple of 6-packs, just shooting the breeze with people, right?
Right.
So, yeah, that was crazy.
Herman Silva goes the wrong way and he still wins. But,
Yeah.
That's what sports is. Sports does encompass so much emotion, so many facets of life do just play out in these contrived environments of competition. Tears of joy, tears of rage. You got Jets fans tearing up Shea Stadium after losing another game. You got memorable moments like you were there when Keith Smart hit this jumper. You got characters like Vince Dooley down in Florida or down in Georgia, with his southern drawl. Sometimes things don't go as planned, like the National, or didn't go as planned as for Silva when he turns right into Central Park, But I think about it is like such a reflection of life. And
yeah.
And you know that well. I wanted to close real quick with a tribute to you because you've been through a lot, In the fall of 2017, you began taking courses at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism in Midtown to get your master's at 57. Yeah. Did you have a little beanie on your head?
I don't have to lie about my age and all that. The Brooklyn Nets did away with their, multimedia job that I was doing, which was great. Loved it, learned so much from that. And I had been teaching at Rutgers. They had called me like years before. And then it became like almost any place you teach now, they want to see a master's. So I was like, well, why not? Kind of like.
Yeah, why not, right? That's the spirit you brought to all your reporting. Why not? What is it?
Right? I remember Mel Stoudemire, former Yankee pitching coach, may rest in peace, right? When he was diagnosed with cancer, somebody said, he was asked, well, do you ever wonder, why you? And he said, why not me? What's different than me than anyone? What's special about me than anybody else, right?
Right.
So first of all, it kept me around young people, right? I'm in classes now with kids in their 20s and some other people maybe 30s, 40s, right? And I'm learning new skills, right?
Right.
And I just absolutely loved it there. I got my master's and allowed me to teach at some other places. And
you earned your master's at a time when you had to say, why not? About 6 weeks into studying for your master's, you were diagnosed with cancer and really went through a lot. 3 relapses and all the treatments. What, when you think about what you've been through, and thankfully you're doing well now, but when you went through your health struggles, did it change how you thought about your sports writing career and your life?
It's a heck of a question. Great question. I don't know what it is, Jonesy. I never believed that it was gonna quote unquote win. Right? I always believed okay, I got this diagnosis. What do we do? What's the next step? What do we do? I do remember though the first time I heard the words, thinking, shit, I don't want to let anybody down. And my wife said to me later that she was like, what are you talking about? And I said I don't know, kids are still young, I don't know, I don't want to let anybody down. And, trust me when I say this, right? I'm not saying that there are a couple of days where you're in bed or, and you just say oh, man, this just sucks, right? This sucks, right? But if you're in one of those infusion rooms, I'll never forget this, right? I had brought my work bag with me, right? And on the work bag, I always have these little pins, right? Cover the national championship. I put that year's pin on it, right? I don't remember what pin I had. Actually, I do know. It was one with King Kong on it, right? King Kong climbing the Empire State Building. I think it was for the Kickoff Classic, right? And there was some father cradling his young kid. I don't know. The kid and I made eye contact. Kid has no hair, right? And he looks at me and gives a faint little smile, and he starts playing with the pin on my backpack, right? And I say to the father, it's sharp on the back. It's okay if I give him this, just, be careful with it. I was 57, right? Sure, there's a lot more I want to do and all that, but I had already lived a really full life, We just talked about it, right? Nobody grows up in Brooklyn, New York, at least in my circle, I think. I'm like, yeah, one day I'm going to cover the Olympics in, Athens. One day I'm going to go to China and, toboggan down, the Great Wall of China, today I think I'll go out and, cover Game 7 of the World Series. Are you kidding me? Right?
Yeah, right.
So, I always said to myself, because I honestly believe it, I honestly feel it, I've lived a charmed frickin' life, and fortunately, found the one doctor in the Northeast who'd ever heard of my cancer. Right?
Yeah, you had a rare cancer in your head and neck, and the treatment even involved targeted gene therapy. Yeah,
they're still doing it. I was the first guy in this experimental trial, and now 10 other people are on it, and that's the thing I'm quote unquote happiest about, proud about, right? That they, I got a great doctor who's this cool Brooklyn hipster, right? We just kind of clicked and hit it off, and he was like, look, I need a guinea pig. And I'm like, where do I sign?
Why not?
Because I've been called a pig a lot, so to be called a guinea pig was the step up, right? So just, hey, somebody else might benefit from that. Worth it.
Yeah.
Worth it. Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy, obviously, that you're doing well, that you've, fought your way through. And I'm just really appreciative of our friendship over the years. We haven't talked nearly enough in recent years. And I think back on my own career a lot differently now at my age. And I didn't go through the health challenges that you have pulled through. And I just want to tell you thank you so much for, for giving us your time and for sharing your stories with us, because it's time is very valuable. And I'm just so lucky that you're willing to give us this time.
Hey, like I said, when you first reached out, humbled, speechless kind of, right? I've seen, I know some of the other dudes that you've had on this show, you got Mount Rushmore guys. So I figured I really must owe you money or something.
No, I owe you money. You owe me beer. Is that the way that went? No, I think it's the opposite. No.
There's no loser in this game.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll pay up at some point. Thanks for listening to Pressbox Access. You can find us here with a new episode every other Wednesday. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. We'd love for you to review us. 5 stars would be nice. Follow us on social media. Drop us an email at pressboxaccess@gmail.com. And be sure to spread the word. Everyone is welcome here. This has been a production of Evergreen Podcast. A special thank you to executive producers Michael D'Aloia and Gerardo Orlando, producer Bill Huffman, and our audio engineer Nathan Corson. I'm your host, Todd Jones. It's closing time. Rock on.
I'm Ken Harbaugh, host of Warriors in Their Own Words, a podcast that presents the unvarnished, unsanitized truth of what we have asked of those who defend this nation. As a country, we need these stories more than ever. Stories from Americans who have borne the battle, including 30-year-old remastered interviews with veterans from World War I recounting their time in the trenches of Europe, and with veterans from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and from our most recent conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other battlefields Americans may never have heard of. Hear their stories by listening to Warriors in Their Own Words wherever you find podcasts.